Aloha. Let's get started. Before I start talking about musical theater and finishing that up, let's go over some dates. May the 2nd. That'll be your final exam. The fourth exam. It includes questions about Blythe's spirit and in everything since the third exam. If you, for any reason, have missed an exam, the makeup day is May the 7th at 10:30, from 10:30 to 12:30, right here. Okay? If you have not missed any exams, you don't have to come that day, unless you just love me and want to bring me a cup of coffee. But other than that, you don't have to come. So, you will have finished everything by May the 2nd. Any questions about that?
What time's the makeup day on May 2nd?
10:30 to 12:30. Yes, sir. And Blythe's Spirit opens Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, 7:30, Sunday at 2, in the Bud Frank Theater, which is in the first floor of the Gilbreth Building. Don't miss it. There will be questions about it on the final exam. Some of you have said that because you have National Guard camp or whatever reason, if you can't go for some reason, you can come Wednesday, that's tomorrow, also at 7:30, that's the final dress rehearsal. Okay? Don't be late. Don't be late. All right? With that said, unless there are any questions, we're going to finish up musical theater, and then I want to talk about theater of diversity, which is our next topic. Okay, no questions? Good? The last thing I talked about, I believe, was Showboat. Yep. And once the idea of the book came into being, once that idea of the book, Jerome Kern, once he created that idea, and the idea of the book is that we have a script, a story. We're going to tell this story, and all the music, all the singing, all the dancing, as well as the acting, tells that story. So we just don't stick songs into a show just because it would be a fun song to sing or because it's popular. It has to tell the story, and it's original. It's written for the play, for the book. Okay? Now, there was a team of writers Rodgers and Hammerstein. Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote 9 major musicals. They also wrote a number of other things other than just musicals, but they did some television, just made for TV musicals that they wrote. Their first show that they wrote was in 1942, and it was a pretty big hit. Oklahoma. They would also write a lot of other of the musicals you've probably heard of. How many of you have heard of The King and I? A few people. Yeah, cool. How many of you have heard of the musical Cinderella? They did that. It was recently done on TV again, starring the singer Brandy. You may have seen that. It was on TV and did pretty well. The other real big hit of theirs was The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music. The hills are alive and it's pretty frightening. Yeah, that's been done a lot. The Sound of Music. The one I'm going to ask you about, though, will be Oklahoma. That's the one to remember. Pretty much what they did with Oklahoma is they took a story, it was actually a novel, and it was about how Oklahoma became a state. And that was the premise. That's how they set up this story. And they tell the story of a young woman named Lori and her aunt. That's me. Their aunt, I was getting ready to curse you guys out for having your phone on. Their aunt is a big character in the story. And what happens is a cowboy named Curly falls in love with Lori, and she likes him too. And there's another character named Judd who works on her farm. And Judd likes her a lot. And she thinks Judd's creepy. And we learn that she has a good right to think that Judd is creepy because he's expected, there was another farm that some farmhand who looked a lot like Judd worked at, and the house was burnt up and all the people in it were killed. And they never caught the guy that did it. And as the story goes along, you really begin to believe that was the same person that's now working at her farm. And he's real jealous of the cowboy, Curly, and doesn't want Curly hanging around her. In fact, threatens him, says, I'll kill you if you, well, that is a threat. Yeah, he threatens him if he hangs around with her. Meanwhile, the other part of the story is the farmers want statehood, and of course the farmers want to see towns grow up and have fences and farm in the land. The cowboys want open range, and they don't want fences. And so there's kind of this confrontation between the cowboys and the farmers over what they're going to do. Should Oklahoma remain a territory, or should it become a state? And the peacekeeper between the two groups is Aunt Eller, Lori's aunt. And she tries to bring the two groups together. At the end of the story, as in all Rodgers and Hammerstein stories, happy ending. Everybody wins except Judd. Judd gets killed. Curly is going to marry Lori. They're happy together. And we discover Oklahoma is going to be a state. And it ends with the big production number, which is now the Oklahoma State Song. Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain, and the waving weeded shore smells sweet. It's a real toe tapper. But it is now the Oklahoma State Song, one of them. But it came from this show. I want to show you a quick scene, because this scene is from Broadway play. It stars Hugh Jackman. He played Curly on Broadway. And when I first saw Hugh Jackman in this, I was shocked because I didn't think Wolverine could sing and dance. But he's pretty good. And he really can sing very well, which you have to do if you play Curly. And he can dance very well. And he plays a pretty tough cowboy. And in this scene, there's a barn raising, and they have a party. And Aunt Eller invites all the farmers and all the cowmen in the area to come together to the party. In other words, so they can make peace. And this is an interesting piece of choreography because in the middle of a song and dance number, they have a fight, which is, I think, kind of cool, the way they work it out. So we're going to watch the number, and you'll get to see the choreography, the dancing, which is pretty famous for this show, and you'll get to hear one of the songs. So if we can run that, the farmer and the cowman should be friends. Remember when I said that musical theater is presentational and theatric? In other words, they let you know they're doing a play. They let you know that here. They're not trying to be real. In fact, there's another version of this that I used to show classes, and it's more faithful to the 1942 version, which was very theatric, extremely theatric, to the point of the cowboys wore like light blue and pink chaps because it was musical theater. They wanted it to be real light colored and happy. And the first time I saw that, I went, I've been on some ranches. I don't think you could wear those. That would not go over too well on the ranch. But they did in that show. Again, to let you know, it's a musical. That's what they want you to know. You're not supposed to take it seriously. But the choreography, all the acting, all the singing, it tells the story. It helps tell the story. Okay, remember that. Rodgers and Hammerstein, they followed the idea of the book, and what they did, once they began writing in the 1940s, they set the standard for all the musicals that followed throughout the 40s, 50s, and on into the 60s. The format, the way musicals were presented, followed this. How they produced music, how they wrote musicals. Everybody copied them because their shows were such big hits. A lot of their music is based on the music that was popular in the 1940s. Big band music. It's got a jazz bass, but it's the kind of music that big bands played because that's what was popular in the 1940s. Now, here's a problem. Everything that was written after that had the same kind of music in it. Told the same kind of stories. And it didn't matter if it was Fiddler on the Roof, which is about a family in Russia, a Jewish family in Russia having to flee from the Tsar, or whether it was Bye Bye Birdie telling the story of hipsters in the 1950s. They all follow the same format. They're all the same. Why would that become a problem, do you think?
It's boring.
Yeah.
Everything's the same when you go to it.
Exactly. What happened is the audiences who loved this, who were young when that came out, got old. Some of them started dying off. They didn't go to the theater anymore. And what was happening to theaters, and in the early 1970s, in the late 1960s, theater, especially musical theater on Broadway, almost died. So few people were going to see the new Broadway musicals. Because people who were the age you are now didn't want to see them. I mean, how many of you, be honest, would want to go get the Oklahoma CD after seeing this and ride around your car and listen to it? Yeah. That was the problem. The people who lived in 1940s thought this was great. It was their kind of music. Okay? Broadway almost dies. And could have died. Along comes a producer He's really important. His name is Joseph Papp. P-A-P-P. Joseph Papp. Joseph Papp is a Broadway producer, or was. He's passed away now. And he was also the artistic director of the Public Theater in New York. The artistic director of the Public Theater. Joseph Papp was very concerned, because he was a producer and an artistic director, was very concerned about dwindling audiences. The fact that it looked like theater might die, Broadway might die. And he wrote some articles, and he made a lot of speeches. And he talked to a lot of other Broadway producers. And he came up with some ideas that I think saved Broadway. And what he did was he said, look, we keep doing musicals that young people don't like or won't come to see. We keep doing these musicals for old people. Our audience is dying out. We need to do something for the youth. That was one idea. His other idea was all the people going to see plays are white. And most of them are wealthy, because it costs a lot of money to go see Broadway plays. In most cities, people who go to see plays tend to have money. Why? Because it costs a lot of money to go see a play. He said, this is wrong. I want to open up plays for minorities. I want to get minorities to come into the theater. I want to start doing plays about minorities. That was his second big idea. His third idea was he talked about how theater was becoming elitist. In other words, it was only for the rich. It was only for the well-to-do, the elite. And he said, I want to train people who normally would not think about coming to see a play, that plays are cool. I want to teach them that plays are cool and that you will want to come see some plays. That plays are not just for the elite, they're for everybody. And one of the things he did, it doesn't have anything to do with musicals so much, but he would load up on a flatbed truck, and they would drive down into boroughs of New York, some of the poor neighborhoods, and they would set up a big flatbed truck, put up a sound system, and Broadway stars would come out and perform for free for local people. And people who had never seen a play, certainly had never seen a Broadway play, got exposed to that. That was something exciting for them. The last thing he did, but again, it doesn't have anything to do with musical theater as much as it just does with theater and with getting people to like theater. He started a theater in Central Park in New York. And it's called Shakespeare in the Park. They built a theater in Central Park, an amphitheater, outdoors, and during the summer, Broadway and film actors will come in and perform Shakespeare in the Park. They do 2 or 3 shows a summer for free. The productions are totally free. They cost nothing to go see. And you get to see top name people performing Shakespeare in the Park. People line up, to this day, it's still there, people will line up forever to try to get in to see the plays. And he'll have stars like, for example, one of the big stars who comes back, has been back a lot, performed there a lot, is Meryl Streep. So you have a movie star like Meryl Streep just come in and do, and one of the things I've seen her do, and she did it with Raul Julia, who's passed away now. But she and Raul Julia did Taming of the Shrew. And the fact that you could go into a, don't pay anything. As long as there's seats, till they fill all the seats, anybody's welcome. Go see Shakespeare in the Park. The idea was, if you see it done by really good people, you'll want to go back and see more. And it's worked. Shakespeare in the Park is one of the most popular things in terms of theater in the country. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people have gone to see Shakespeare in the Park. And if you're ever in New York in the summer, it's something you should look into doing because it's free. It's totally free. Joseph Papp begins to change theater. And he produces a musical which is going to just turn the world upside down. And the musical he produces is called Hair. How many of you have heard of the play Hair? Just had a revival on Broadway. Hair came out in 1969. And Hair is the story about a group of hippies. The music is all rock. Rock and soul. And the story, and this is what he did with Joseph Papp when he produced this, he wasn't worried about the story. He wasn't worried about the book anymore. In fact, he called this a rock opera. And it has a story, but it's really loose. The story is about a guy who gets drafted during the Vietnam War, and he goes to New York City to get ready to go into the Army, and he runs into this group of hippies who don't want him to go to the war. And in the end, one of them goes for him so he can stay and be with the girl that he loves. It's about taking drugs. It's about the sexual revolution. It's about fun. And it's about rock and roll. That's what the story's about. A lot of songs that were hits in the late 60s and early 70s came from this musical. The song Hair was one of them. And Aquarius is another one of the big ones that came from this. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's all about peace, love, rock and roll, drugs, and sex. It was even famous because it had a nude scene in it. And people thought that was shocking. In fact, nowadays people will say they were required, the actors were required to get nude in this play. They weren't. It just happened. It was a happening. And one night, some of the actors decided to take their clothes off. And it kind of became a tradition. Some of the actors in one of the numbers take their clothes off. And they'd be out there naked, dancing. They would invite people in the audience to come on up. Audience involvement. People in the audience would get up in the theater and start dancing with them, having a party. That's what the show was about. There has been a revival of it. It's a hit again. It was performed first well, they started talking about it in England, but it got performed off Broadway, and then it got on Broadway. Then it went to London, and it toured the world. I'm real proud because one of my students, Allison Gwynn, who's from Irwin, was in that company. And she did the Broadway show, the London show, and the national tour, or the world tour, which I'm real proud of her for doing it. She's going to be in the clip, where I'm going to show you a clip from it. Now, this is taken from a television show, but the choreography is true to the play. You're going to see the play's choreography. But it's going to look a lot different than The Farmer and the Cowman Should Be Friends. Okay? Give you a little bit of Hair. What do you think? What do you think? A little different than Farmer and the Cowman Should Be Friends. Could you get into this? Any of you? Few of you? Known into that kind of? Yeah, maybe, sort of, kind of. Yeah, it's rock and roll. It's rock. The whole thing's rock. Now, what Pap did is he opened up the doors for a lot of other things. And some of the other shows that he either produced or directed there at the Public Theater, one was a story about Jesus Christ. It was produced in London first, but it came to the United States, and then Joseph Papp produced it. Jesus Christ Superstar, which is a rock opera. And it tells about the last days of the life of Jesus Christ. Another one that he did, I'll bet some of you may have heard about it. The Wiz.
Michael Jackson?
Michael Jackson did the movie. Was in the movie along with a whole lot of stars. The Wiz is the story of the Wizard of Oz. And all updated music, has nothing to do with the first story. And it's incredible. It's a really incredible musical. But Pat produced that. He got that on Broadway. Why? It's an all-black cast. And it's music, again, that young people would like. And it took off, and of course they made the movie with Michael Jackson, and Diana Ross played Dorothy, and a whole bunch of other people are in that movie. Would not have happened had it not been for this man, Joseph Papp. And he did more. He did a lot of things. He produced a lot of new shows, and these shows featured young people, minorities. Another one that he produced, I forgot about this one, Grease. He's responsible for Grease. How many of you have heard of Grease? Yeah, that one's a little more known. What they wanted to do with Grease is go back and kind of do a show that had the musical style of the 1950s in it, the late 1950s, rock and roll again. Story about greasers. That's why it's called Grease. When the play came out on Broadway, it was a little more biting. The story was stronger. And then they made the movie with John Travolta in it. And they rewrote a lot of it for the movie, and they made it lighter. They took away, one of the storylines in it is one of the women in it is a high school girl, and she gets pregnant. And she doesn't know what to do about the baby. When it first came out, it was really heavy. That was really heavy. In the movie, I bet you don't even remember that happening. They cut all that out. And they lightened it up. They made it just happy. And then what I thought was funny in the movie is they put disco music in it. Which, it's not 1950s. When it reopened on Broadway, guess what was in it? Disco music. They took the movie script and they put that back on Broadway. This opened up the doors for a lot of other things to happen. One of the things that happened is Disney came to Broadway. Again, Joseph Papp opened the doors for this. Why Disney? Why would they want to get Disney in Broadway?
Talk about musicals, you know. Disney's got storylines and the music already made.
Yeah, the movies, what they did is they took Disney movies, put them back on Broadway, changed them to live plays. So one of the first ones they did was The Lion King. And I had a former student that was in that. But the Lion King, when it opened up on Broadway, you could not get tickets. Okay, put the name Disney on something. Now people come from all over the world to New York City to go see Disney on Broadway. Broadway's doing real well now. It's making a lot of money. You can't get tickets for a lot of shows. But there are a bunch of Disney shows on Broadway. Why? They're popular. People love them. Families go to see them. And the music, people know because they've seen it in the movies. Okay? The other thing that happened, we're going to go from Disney to the dark side.
Star Wars?
No, there's not Star Wars the musical yet. Not yet. I go Father Luke. Anyway, what happened was Broadway began to explore with musicals, began to explore topics and stories that they would not have done back in the 1940s. In other words, there's a lot of musicals that have come out, again, since Mr. Papp, that are not happy. They're not happy endings. Sometimes they're very dark endings, yet they're done to music. And one of the guys who's key to this, hello. I lost my eraser. Oh, thank you. Stephen Sondheim. Stephen Sondheim writes musicals. He's a composer, writer, and his musicals, for the most part, are very dark. And one of them, I'll bet you know. It's a big hit recently, the film. Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd, when it first opened, people could not believe that they were putting this on Broadway, because it's not a happy story. It's based on a British folk tale about a guy who's a barber, the demon barber of Fleet Street, who has some issues. Thank you. And if he doesn't like you, or even if he does kind of like you, he shaves you, and then he slits your throat. He's the demon barber of Fleet Street. And then the bodies he gives to this friend of his who owns a meat shop, Mrs. Lovett, who makes pies, meat pies. When she meets Sweeney, her pies are the worst in London because she doesn't have the money to buy a lot of meat to put into them. And all of a sudden she has a huge meat supply, supplied to her by her friend Sweeney. He cuts their throats, they grind them up, put them in the meat pies, and all of a sudden she has the best meat pie shop in London. Isn't that a fun play? And it's all sung. It's a musical. How many of you saw the Johnny Depp movie? Yeah, when they said Johnny Depp was going to do it, I didn't believe it because I didn't know he could sing, but he did really well. The problem with Sondheim is his musicals are hard. They're hard to sing. He writes really complicated stuff. And he's a genius. I mean, and he is produced all over the world. He's written some other real happy shows. Another one that he wrote was called Assassins. And Assassins is a play about anybody who's ever tried to or did assassinate an American president. And they all get together and have a jolly good time. So there's John Wilkes Booth and Hinckley and Oswald, all of them are all together, and they sing and dance, and talk about killing presidents. Nice, happy musical. Fun stuff. Actually, it is fun. It's pretty funny, parts of it. But it's strange humor. Okay? And he's written a lot of these, a lot of different kinds of musicals. And it's good. He's a good writer. The last thing in musical theater that I want to talk to you about is the longest running play, the longest running musical ever on Broadway. That sounds like a test question. The longest running musical on Broadway. What do you think is the longest running musical ever on Broadway?
Lion King.
Huh?
Lion King.
Lion King? Ding, 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 ding. How'd you know? You don't know? You saw it on Broadway? Did you like it? You didn't like it? None of it? Oh.
Stole music from Pink Floyd.
Huh?
Stole music from Pink Floyd.
Stole music from Pink Floyd? Phantom of the Opera started in 1988. It's still on Broadway. It's the longest running musical ever on Broadway. It beat out Cats. Cats used to be the longest running musical on Broadway. But now it's Phantom of the Opera. Again, a dark musical. It's a story about a woman who's an opera singer, and Eric, who's the Phantom, is this deformed guy that lives up in the rafters of the theater, and he kidnaps her. And he's been killing people. He kills a bunch of people in the theater. And that's what the story is. It's a love story, in a way. And at the end, she does get away from him. But one of the things, and the big moment in the play is he finally gets kissed. That's how she frees him, is she kisses him without him asking. And he's got this mask he wears because his face is all deformed. And she asks to see his face, takes off the masks, sees the deformity, kisses him, and he's so moved he lets her go. And with the promise that she will be there at his funeral, and that's the story. It's a touching story, but it's not your happy-go-lucky musical, and she hated it. Just terrible. You loved it. Oh, we got Siskel and Ebert over here. Okay, but it's the longest-running show ever on Broadway, musical ever on Broadway. And it's been on there since '88, so it's been there quite a long time. Any questions about musicals? Okay, well, if there are no questions, I want to change my lecture and go to the next thing, which is theater of diversity. Theater of diversity. Would you raise the screen? I don't need the screen now. There we go. You can go ahead and turn the projector off. All right. Up till now, I've mostly been talking about dead white guys. I'm now going to talk about some other people. A little diversity, a little bit. We're going to talk about other groups, ethnic groups. We're going to talk about some women that have been very powerful in theater, and not just the dead white guys. Okay? So we're going to begin by talking about African American theater. And the first African American theater in this country was the African Grove Theater. It was in New York City, and it was in existence from 1820 to 1821. Here's some names to know. William Brown, James Hewlett, Ira Aldridge, and this is a play. Okay. Now I got all that written up there, I can talk about it. Okay. The African Grove Theater was owned by this gentleman, William Brown. William Brown plays a pretty important role in this story. The African Grove Theater started out as just the African Grove, and it was a tea house, a coffee house, a tea house. Its patrons were mostly freed slaves who had come to live in New York City. And it was a place where they would go, have something to eat, drink tea, sit around and talk. It's a place to go hang out. I mean, much the same as today, you go hang out at Starbucks with your friends, have a cup of coffee, talk. That's what they did at the African Grove Theater. Cheaper prices, though. You could go to the African Grove, they would hang out, they would talk about things. And then William Brown loved entertainment. So he loved entertainment, and he would begin to have people come in and perform there. And one of the things that they liked to do at that day and time is people would come in, actors, and an actor would come out on stage and do monologues or scenes from Shakespeare. And William Brown loved Shakespeare, just loved it. And so he had people come in and perform for him. And two of the people who did this, two of the actors, are James Hewlett and Ira Aldridge. Now, I think this is a really neat story. William Brown gets the idea to change his coffee house into a legitimate theater. And what he wants to do is put on plays. And he wants to do them in his theater. And what kind of plays would he want to do? Shakespeare. He decides he's going to do Shakespeare with all black casts. And he's going to put on the plays of Shakespeare. James Hewlett, and this is historically we know this is a fact, is the first African American to play the role of Othello. And he did it at the African Grove Theater. Up till then, and for many years after this, it would only be done by white actors. White actors in blackface. But James Hewlett was the first African American to perform Shakespeare's Othello. Now, they get ready to do a production of Richard III, Shakespeare's Richard III. And across town, in one of the legitimate theaters, they're producing Richard III. And they've brought in an actor manager, to perform in Richard III. And he's the father of an assassin, John Wilkes Booth. This man's name was Junius Brutus Booth. I think I've talked about him in here already.
What play are we doing?
Yeah, what play are we doing? Drunk all the time. Well, Junius Brutus Booth didn't like the idea that across town a group of black actors were doing the same play he was doing. He got angry. He tells the producer of his theater, I won't do the play unless you stop them. And so the producer of the white theater goes to the police, complains. The police go over to the African Grove Theater, claim that it's a fire hazard, and they closed it down. Billy Brown tries to fix the things that they point out are the fire hazard. They go back in and they arrest Billy Brown and his actors. And they put them all in jail. This is what's really cool. If you want to use the word cool. Interesting. They tell Billy Brown he can get out of jail if he signs a paper saying he'll never do Shakespeare again. Now, they arrested him on fire code. But if he signs a paper saying that he will not produce Shakespeare again at his theater, they'll let him out of jail. And at first, Billy Brown was not going to do this. And finally, he decides to do so. And he signed, and his actors signed a paper saying they would not perform Shakespeare. And they let him out of jail. And then William Brown does something that I think is amazing. He writes a play. And it's called King Shotaway. This is the first play written by an African American in the United States. Freed slave, William Brown, writes King Shotaway. It's a story of a Caribbean king. They produce it, and it was a big hit for the time. But there was a lot of pressure on William Brown to close the theater, and he's only around for 2 years, and he closes it. It never came back. This play, this story has been talked about a lot. In fact, there's a play, a modern play, by a writer named Carlisle Brown. And the play is called The African Company Presents Richard III. It tells this story of William Brown and his actors. It's a really good play. And we don't know really what happened to William Brown after this. And the play, King Shotaway, the script was lost. We know they performed it. We know what it was about because of newspaper articles. But the play, the script itself, this would be a historian's dream. If somebody could find that play somewhere in an attic, somewhere in New York. But we know it was written. We just don't have it anymore. James Hewlett and Ira Aldridge were great actors. In fact, both Hewlett and Aldridge go to Europe because they can't get roles acting in the United States because of their color. In Europe, they're both stars. They perform all over Europe. And in fact, Ira Aldridge was buried with honors in a church where only great artists were allowed to be buried. And they were quite celebrated over in Europe. Any questions about them? If you like reading plays and you're interested in some plays that deal with American history, Carlisle Brown has written some great stuff. He wrote this one, another play of his that he wrote that I love a lot. It's called Buffalo Soldiers. And, Buffalo Hare. Buffalo Hare. It's about the Buffalo Soldiers. It's about the 10th Cavalry fighting the Native American Indian Wars of the late 1800s. And it's a lovely play about a group of 10th Cavalry soldiers, and they're sitting around the campfire during the play. And the next morning, they know they're going to attack the Sioux, and they're making a decision. They start talking about how they get treated when they go into towns, when they go into cities, because of their color. And they begin to debate whether or not they should join the Indians instead of attacking them. And at the end, they make the decision to be loyal to the United States, and they're going to go do their duty as soldiers. But it's a real touching, very, very interesting play about the 10th Cavalry. Okay, if there's no questions about that, we're going to jump a little time. After the 1820s, am I doing on time? Yeah. After the 1820s, there is no African American theater for quite a while. Finally, in the 1930s, thanks to the Federal Theater Project, this is during the Great Depression, one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's project was the Federal Theater Project. The idea to get jobs, create jobs to end the Depression was money was given to different cities to create theaters with the hope that it would create jobs, and it did work. And a number of theaters around the country were built. And in 22 cities, African American theaters were built and plays were performed. Brought a lot of work to African American actors. I talked a little bit about this gentleman the other day, Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson is an actor. Paul Robeson was born in 1898 and he died in 1976. In 1915, he attended Rutgers University. He graduates with the highest grade point average in his class and goes on to law school at Columbia University. While he's at Columbia University, to make some money, he plays football for two different pro football teams, the Akron Pros and the Milwaukee Badgers. These are in the 1920s. He goes to England to study, and while he's there, he tries auditions for a play and gets cast in a professional play, starts acting. Returns to the United States, and the playwright Eugene O'Neill hears about Paul Robeson, In fact, what he did is he went to, there was a nightclub in Harlem that was pretty swinging place in the 20s called the Cotton Club. Any of you ever heard of the Cotton Club? The Cotton Club was a jazz club, and all the big name performers of the time performed there. And it got to be a place where both whites and blacks went. It was the happening place in New York City. You would go there to see the acts perform and also to get a little something to drink during Prohibition. One of the people performing there, singing, was Paul Robeson. Eugene O'Neill saw him and said, I got to have him. And he got him to be on Broadway. And he acted in a play called All God's Children Got Wings. And that got him started as an actor. He would go on. He was in Showboat, which I showed you the scene that he was in the other day. The film Showboat. He also became very famous for doing the play Othello. He did a number of performances of Othello. Eventually, he would get tired of acting. Again, he was a lawyer. He got involved in the civil rights movement. He worked with Martin Luther King, was in a lot of marches. And after, as he got older, he started to travel around the world fighting for civil rights in countries all over the planet. And he continued to do that until his death. As I said in here the other day when I was talking about it, to do one of these things, you would have a successful life. He did them all, and what's amazing is he did them all well. He could have been a professional football player. He was. He could have been a singer. He was. He could have been an actor. He was. He could have been a lawyer. He was. And he fought, again, for civil rights. I'm going to stop with him, and we'll pick this up, musical theater next, or theater of diversity, next time. See you then.